Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. And just before you begin, can I make an announcement about tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure whether it has yet been communicated to anyone, but during the lunch break, one of the council team and I discussed whether it was practicable to call Mr. Longman tomorrow, given that there had been, as I understand it, disclosure of hundreds of documents in relation to which had a bearing on Mr. Longman's evidence at the end of last week, as I understand it. Counsel to the inquiry has only just begun to understand the significance of some of those documents. And in truth, he informs me that many of the documents disclosed are of relevance and need to be made public and the subject of questioning on Mr. Longman. Given where we are in relation to that, I've decided that it would not be fair to Mr. Longman to ask him to consider many documents at extremely short notice. That's assuming even that they can be got to him before he begins his evidence. And it would certainly be very unsatisfactory for him to be seeing documents as he is giving evidence. So, as I've said, I've decided that Mr. Longman's evidence should be postponed. That is regrettable in one sense, in the obvious sense that we're going to lose a day tomorrow. However, it does make some sense that Mr. Longman's evidence be heard at about the same time as the evidence or the further evidence to be given by Mr. Jarnail Singh. And so it's my intention that both those witnesses should be called either at the end of phase 4 or perhaps even in phase 5 when those parts of their evidence which overlap and or dovetail can be examined at more or less sequentially. So that's an oral announcement. It may not have been preceded by a written announcement, but the effect of it is that there will be no evidence from Mr. Longman tomorrow, and it will be postponed to a suitable date in the new year.
Thank you, sir. Shall I proceed with the questioning of Mr. Wilcox?
Yes, please, yeah.
Mr. Wilcox, we left off before lunch on the question of the use to which you put Mrs. Rudkin's list of weekly discrepancies and the question of the use you consider ARQ data would have served in this case. Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 115 of Mr. Wilcox's statement? That's page 33, please. At paragraph 115, you say this in the context of the investigation into Mrs. Rudkin. As part of the investigation, I requested Horizon ARQ data, and my report to Jarnail Singh, dated the 29th of January 2009, shows that there was nothing untoward regarding these figures. There is no reference to you obtaining ARQ data in your report to legal services. Is the only reason you think you requested any ARQ data the document referenced here, POL 000-46505? Is that document the basis for your understanding that you requested some ARQ data?
I was asked to do some further investigations with regard to previous time to my actual investigation that I was undertaking.
Okay.
But I think I would have ordered ARQ data anyway, pending a committal. Could
we have on screen, please, the summons for Mrs. Rudkin at POL 000-46537? This is dated the 12th of February 2009. In the middle of the page, there is the alleged offence, theft, and the period to which that charge relates, the 1st of January 2007 to the 20th of August 2008. Could we now have on screen, please, the document you reference at paragraph 115 of your statement? That is POL 000-46505. The recipient of this communication is Jarnail Singh. Going over to the second page, please. We can see it's from you and dated the 29th of January 2009. Going back to page 1, please. You say this: your original advice on this case is noted at pages 14 to 16 of these papers. Thank you. Due to the admissions made by Mrs. Rudkin to the theft of in excess of £43,000, I was instructed to revisit the case, and in particular the reported robbery which took place on the 5th of January 2006, in which the business has stood a loss of £58,000 after appeal against culpability. The confidential police reports can be found at pages 26 to 31 of these papers. Then you say this: I requested Horizon data for this period, which showed nothing untoward, and also obtained bank disclosure authority for the last 6 years' bank accounts. You appear to be saying here that you requested Horizon data not for the period of the 1st of January 2007 to the 20th of September 2008, but instead for the earlier period in 2006, when the robbery took place. Is that right?
I was asked to continue investigations into the previous robbery. So ARQ data was requested to look into that. However, because the ARQ data wasn't considered necessary for the initial investigation, I would have asked for that after the papers had been submitted in case there was a committal. So I would have requested it, but it wasn't used to form my decision.
What is the basis for you saying you would have requested it? There's no reference in it in your legal report.
Because it wasn't relevant. As I said, the fact that Mrs. Rudkin was covering up losses and inflating the cash, it would not have shown in the ARQ data. So I didn't consider it necessary to look at that because it wouldn't have given me any evidence either way. But I would have requested it once the papers were sent in case it was required as part of a legal bundle.
So when you're referring here at paragraph 15 to requesting Horizon data, at that paragraph, are you referring to your request for the period relating to the robbery alone, or both that and another request?
That particular request where I said I have examined ARQ data and it shows no anomalies, that was to do with the robbery. Yeah.
Okay. Is it right that you made no attempt to compare the list of weekly discrepancies made by Mrs. Rudkin to any Horizon data to try and establish the cause of the shortages?
Absolutely pointless.
But I'm sorry, if you could answer my question, please.
Yeah, sorry. No, because it wouldn't have compared because there were no losses being shown.
You have referred in a number of places to assisting sub-postmasters and branches to investigate unexplained losses. What did you do to help Mrs. Rudkin to get to the bottom of her unexplained losses?
I couldn't do anything because the ARQ data, once you start altering cash figures and covering them up, you don't know whether it's a genuine loss or not. There is absolutely nothing you can do if somebody is covering up losses. You've got nothing to go on at all.
Going back, please, to the communication on screen with Jarnail Singh, 3 paragraphs up from the bottom. You say, I wrote to Mrs. Rudkin requesting that she attend a further interview regarding the financial situation prior to the admitted thefts. I have since been in contact with Richard Nelson's solicitors, pages 33 to 35, who have notified me that Mrs. Rudkin does not wish to attend a further interview, as they have concerns over her deteriorating mental health. You were writing this communication around 2 weeks before the summons for Mrs. Rudkin was served. Did you feel any concern about Mrs. Rudkin's mental health in the context of the criminal proceedings being brought against her by the post office?
I think I've mentioned in there that she may not be fit to even go to court, and that was my opinion. It wasn't my decision whether or not we served the summons.
It appears that after this communication, you contacted the police seeking their assistance to pursue investigation of the robbery in 2006. Could we have on screen, please, POL 000 51258? Starting on page 2, please. This is an email dated the 16th of February 2009 from you to Gareth Goddard of the Leicestershire Constabulary. And it reads as follows. Gareth, I have today served the summons on Mrs. Rudkin in connection with her admissions to the theft of £43,000 from the post office last year. An analysis of her financial situation over the last 6 years was undertaken, and it was deemed that a further interview was required regarding the period prior to and leading up to the robbery at the office in 2006. Through her solicitor, she declined the invitation to attend a voluntary interview due to her mental state and the fact that she would not remember events that far back. Please would you make inquiries as to whether any officers would be willing to meet with me to discuss the further evidence with a view to re-interviewing Mrs. Rudkin regarding the state of the post office accounts at the time of the reported robbery. If not, we will just proceed with the theft charges. Thanks for your help, and any problems, please give me a ring. This email appears to have led to a response from the police on the 25th of March 2009. Could we have that on screen, please? It is POL 000 46522. This is an email from Detective Sergeant David Bacon, dated the 25th of March at 3:06 in the afternoon. And he says, Dear Mr. Wilcox, I write to acknowledge your recent email to DS Gareth Goddard and to introduce myself as a future point of contact. I have discussed the robberies with Gareth at length and the exhaustive inquiries that were undertaken. There is no evidence at this time to support the fact that Susan Rudkin fabricated this offence in order to steal monies. Without fresh evidence, I do not propose to reopen the offence after this amount of time and decline the invitation to re-interview Mrs. Rudkin. I propose that you continue as planned with the theft charges. So the police were declining to reopen the investigation.
Yep.
Could we have back on screen, please, POL 000 51258? In the middle of the first page, there is an email from Gareth Goddard, also dated the 25th of March 2009, and timed around 3 hours before DS Bacon's email, which we've just looked at. And this is him to a number of police officers copied to you. He says, Sir, please could someone make contact with Mike Wilcox from the post office? He is sending these emails to me as he had my contact details from my days at Colville CID. The post office he refers to was subject to 2 armed robberies, one of which I charged an offender with, and he was convicted, but the second one was believed to be an inside job by the postmistress. We never had any evidence to support this, however, and it remains undetected. This leads to a further email at the top of the page suggesting that you speak to DS Wheeler. And there are some handwritten notes at the top. Are those made by you?
Yes, they are, yes.
And they read, will assist on voluntary interview, will not arrest. So just to be clear, you were asking the police to arrest Mrs. Rudkin for the purposes of interviewing her about the robbery in 2006. Is that right?
Absolutely not. That's not. What
No?
I'm asking them for is their assistance. And what he said to me, yes, I'll come along and do an interview with you, and it would have been under caution if she attended, but not under arrest. I wasn't asking her to be arrested. She wasn't a suspect, in my opinion, for that, unless the police thought so. It was just a point of saying it's going to be a voluntary interview.
That email at the top suggests there might have been some further discussion about whether or not the police would be involved. Did the police ultimately decline to be further involved?
No, the last contact I got, according to this, is they will assist me on a voluntary interview, but because of the letters I got from the doctor about Mrs. Rudkin, I just dropped it.
In terms of the inquiries he made in Mrs. Rudkin's case relating to the theft charge actually brought, you didn't make any inquiries as to the history of the operation of the Horizon system at the Ibstock branch, did you, at the time?
Any history of the Horizon?
Any history of the operation of Horizon and any concerns or complaints regarding that? You didn't make any inquiries about that at the time, did you?
No.
You are now aware, I think, from documents provided to you by the inquiry for the purposes of preparing your statement, that had you done so, you would have discovered that Mr. Rudkin had raised concerns about the operation of the Horizon system on a number of occasions prior to the investigation of Mrs. Rudkin, including concerns about shortages, phantom transactions, and balancing issues with the Horizon system in 2004 and 2005. Is that right?
I've seen that since, yes.
Looking back, do you think you should have made such inquiries where someone had unexplained losses, as Mrs. Rudkin did?
The situation I was in at the time, the evidence I had was an audit shortage. I had an admission from Mrs. Rudkin that she'd been disguising the losses and she'd been taking money to pay into her bank account. And I'd had the piece of paper from her showing what money was missing. It was not possible to investigate why there were losses because of what she was doing with the accounts. And I'm very surprised, having seen this, that Mr. Rudkin never mentioned it to me at all.
Is it right that during your investigation into Mrs. Rudkin, you didn't make any inquiries of the National Business Support Centre or the Horizon helpline to see whether there were any calls made from the branch which might shed light on the unexplained losses being experienced by Mrs. Rudkin?
That is true, and the reason for that is because she told me that she did not ask for any help, and she knew she should have done, but she didn't.
You appear in your statement to the inquiry to be casting some doubt on Mrs. Rudkin's account in her statement to the inquiry that she called the helpline when she was experiencing difficulties with the system. Is that right?
That's correct. It's not what she told me during the interview. Yeah.
You have no knowledge yourself, do you, of whether Mrs. Rudkin called the helpline or not? Because you didn't ask the question.
Because she told me she hadn't. That's correct.
Why is it, therefore, that you seek to cast doubt on what Mrs. Rudkin says about the fact of calling the helpline?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Why is it, then, that in your statement you seek to cast doubt on what Mrs. Rudkin says about having called the helpline?
I think when I read that statement, I'm very upset at the fact that I was accused of denying her legal representation, because that just didn't happen. When I reread the tapes and the tape summary, she told me that she did not ask for help. So I'm not suggesting, I'm giving her the benefit of doubt that maybe she didn't remember what happened on the day correctly.
Are you now aware that Mrs. Rudkin's conviction was quashed by Southwark Crown Court on the 11th of December 2020?
I am.
At that hearing, it was accepted by the Post Office that the reliability of Horizon in her case was essential, and this was said by counsel for the Post Office appearing at that hearing to be because there were a number of calls from her branch to the help desk relating to Horizon and balancing issues. Could we have paragraph 146, please, of Mr. Wilcox's statement on screen? That is page 38, please. You say here, prior to the original court proceedings of Bates and the Post Office, I was contacted by Post Office Limited regarding my recollection of this case, and it was agreed that it did not fall into the category of Horizon reliability. Why did you feel the need to include that in your statement?
Because I think I was surprised that the case was part of that initial batch of offices, because I didn't consider, I thought that the whole trial and the whole inquiry was about being reliant on Horizon data. I wasn't reliant on Horizon data when I first wrote the case. It was purely based, there was nothing to prove through Horizon, so it was based on the other evidence that I'd obtained.
Is it the case that you are still disbelieving of sub-postmasters, even after their convictions have been overturned?
When the convictions have been overturned, if we're talking about this case in particular, I believe that what she told me on the day was correct.
You deal at paragraphs 163 to 167 of your statement with prosecution numbers. What are you referring to when you say there has been a great deal of discussion regarding the increase in prosecutions since the installation of Horizon?
Yeah, sorry. I've been following the Horizon inquiry for a couple of months now, and there just seemed initially to be discussion around the increase since Horizon. I was just trying to point out that even prior to Horizon, people were stealing money, whether it was postmasters, whether it was staff. There were people that were stealing money, and they were admitting to it. And obviously then you couldn't blame the computer system. There were also people having unexplained losses, and again, you couldn't blame the computer system. In those days, prior to Horizon, you could phone up and say, I've run out of money, can I have some more, please? And nobody would know, because it was all paper-based. You could go 2 or 3 years in between audits, and you could be using money all the time, and nobody would know. I was just trying to make a point that at the introduction of Horizon, it's not possible to do that. So if people were taking money prior to Horizon, there's no reason why that shouldn't have stopped. And I'm just trying to make a point that because it was easier to get caught, to be honest, I would have expected it to increase.
Setting aside anything you have read or heard since you ceased being an investigator for the Post Office, did you personally have any knowledge at the time of the numbers of prosecutions being brought by the Post Office before and after the introduction of Horizon?
Not before the inquiry, no.
You say at paragraph 153 of your statement that you understand through following the inquiry that Fujitsu was withholding information from the Post Office regarding known bugs, errors and defects. Is the basis for that understanding the evidence you have now watched given by Richard Roll, referenced at paragraph 169 of your statement?
I initially read the book by Nick Wallace, and, you know, put me over the edge. But Richard Rowe's evidence has been a complete eye-opener.
You express some anger at Fujitsu at paragraph 168 of your statement. You do not seem to express any anger towards the post office. Do you feel any?
I think, from what I understand, I don't think the post office actually were told by Fujitsu until about 2011, which is the time I left. That may be wrong, but I've got nothing to do to defend the post office at all. I'm here at the inquiry to defend the way that I conducted the investigations.
Having had the opportunity to reflect on matters, do you feel any responsibility for what happened to Mrs. Rudkin?
I've had a long think about this, and would I have done anything different? I think the problem I've got is Mrs. Rudkin was inflating cash figures. She was taking money from the post office, even though she wasn't making losses good. And all that happened way before I got involved. I cannot take responsibility for that. Once I became involved, I purely worked on the evidence that I had.
Sir, those are all the questions that I have for Mr. Wilcox. Do you have any before I turn to call participants?
No, thank you. No.
It appears that there are no questions from call participants for Mr. Wilcox, sir.
Right, thank you, Mr. Wilcox, for coming to give evidence to the inquiry and for answering a good number of questions. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you.
So that concludes Mr. Wilcox's evidence. And do you want a short break before Mr. Thomas starts giving his evidence?
Maybe 5 minutes, sir, just so that we can bring the next witness in.
That's fine. I'll remain where I am, so to speak, but I'll just turn myself off for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
May we please call Mr. Thomas?
Yeah.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Could you confirm your full name, please, Mr. Thomas?
Yes, Gary Rees Thomas.
You should have in front of you a witness statement dated the 4th of October 2023. And if you turn to the last page of that, which is page 36,
Yes,
is that your signature?
it is, yes.
And I understand that before we start, you want to make some corrections to your witness statement. Is that right?
If possible, yes.
So if you just take us through what corrections you would like to make.
Right, okay. First one is paragraph 20. On the second page of paragraph 20. 2, 4, 6, 8 lines down. The sentence starts with, if any admission was made to the auditor either on arrival or during the audit, and it currently says they would write this down. I just wanted to insert the word would usually write this down in case there wasn't a 100% time that they did. The next two are exactly the same wording for paragraph 45 and 56, and it's at the end of each of those paragraphs, which makes it a little bit easier. And I wanted to just add, were the now known bugs, errors and defects apparent and identifiable in any of the ARQ data we received? The fourth one is paragraph 81, and it's a name error there. In my statement, I've put at point 1, Graham Brander's witness statement in support of an application for a restraint order That should actually be Graham Ward, not Graham Brander, I believe, as he was a financial FIU.
Thank you.
And then the final one is on the final paragraph, I think at 119. And to 4 lines from the bottom, it's the sentence starting again. Again, compensation worries appear to be the primary focus, and then I'd like to omit between yes and appropriate.
So you'd like to remove the words yes?
Yes, whilst I do think this would be appropriate, I'd like to omit that, yeah. And that's it.
Those are all the corrections you'd
That's
like to
right,
make?
yes.
And having made those corrections, are the contents of your witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
And for the purposes of the transcript, the URN is WITN 09160100. So my name is Megan Miller, and as you know, I'll be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry. I'm going to ask you questions about issues which arise from phase 4 of the inquiry, focusing on your involvement in the security team, and in particular, your involvement in the case of Mr. Julian Wilson.
Yes.
So first, I'd like to ask you some questions about your professional background. Is it correct that you joined the post office in 1985 as a counter clerk?
That's correct, yes.
And following that, you were an assistant manager and a branch manager before joining the security team in 2000.
That's right, yes.
And you joined the security team as a security manager, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And is it correct that you then left the security team in 2012?
It was around 2012, yes. Yeah, I think it was around maybe the March of 2012, something like that. I did obtain my personnel papers, so I can confirm it exactly if you need me to. But
And after you left the security team, you became a network transformation field change advisor. Is that correct?
that's correct, yes.
And can you just explain briefly what that role entailed?
The network transformation.
Yes, please.
Oh, yes. The post office was going through a complete transformation of its network, where I think again it was probably another cost-cutting exercise where they were looking to change the sub-post office network into what they call mains post offices or local post offices. They were trying to modernise it by taking down the old-fashioned screens and trying to get postmasters to convert to the new model. And that was the type of work I was undertaking at that time.
And is it correct that you then left the post office in 2017?
I did, yes. I took redundancy.
So moving on, please, then to the structure of the security team. When you joined the security team, where was your office located?
My office was located when I joined in the main post office in Bournemouth, in Albert Road. I had an office that I worked out of from there.
And is it correct that Jeff Hall was your line manager when you first joined?
It was, yes.
And later your line managers included Tony Udding, Andy Hayward, Dave Posnett and Jason Collins.
Not Dave Pardo, I think you mentioned, and Andy Hayward. They weren't my direct line managers. They were more senior managers. Jason Collins, yes. Dave Posnett. We did sometimes go through a change of, some people might be in for a few months on temporary promotion or something, but predominantly it started with Jeff Hall and ended with Jason Collins.
And was your line manager located in the same place as you?
No. Jeff was located in Taunton, and Jason was initially located in Croydon and then moved to a different part within London.
And is it right that during the time you were in the security team, you remember the heads of security being Tony Marsh, then followed by Phil Garish, Tony Udding, and then John Scott?
That's right, yes.
And who was the head of security when you left the security team?
It was John Scott.
Could we please turn to page 2 of your witness statement? The reference is WITN 09160100. And if we start at paragraph 4 at the bottom of the page. So you say, during my time in the security/fraud team, I found all of my colleagues and direct line managers, area team leaders, to be both competent, professional and approachable. I did not necessarily feel the same or hold the respect of all of the security senior managers in my final last few years within the team and before I left. Who are the security senior managers you're referring to there?
Predominantly just one, really, which was John Scott. I don't like to mention the other ones who were probably his understudies because I think, how can I put the word, they were just his whipping men.
And you then go on to say, the reason I say this is the first-hand experience I witnessed with the treatment of security team colleagues and managers in the last few years I worked there. They appeared to not welcome any challenges or questions raised from team members with regards to any decisions or changes made or planned to introduce. Did that extend to the way in which criminal investigations were conducted?
Not necessarily, although I can't be specific. It's quite a long time ago, and I know everyone's used that comment pretty much through this inquiry, but it was just various things that would happen, and no one sort of wanted to make a challenge because they felt that they were going to put their head up above the parapet and then replications might happen afterwards. So it seemed like everyone was remaining quiet at times, I think is probably the word to say.
So can you provide us any specific examples?
There was a couple. I mean, one personally towards myself was Mr. Scott wanted to, and I'm not saying it was a bad thing at all, but he was trying to encourage everyone within the security team, investigation managers, whatever you call it, to study specifically for a degree in investigation type work. It was something that I wasn't probably academically able to do, and something I didn't really want to do, and then find that I failed, and etc. etc. So it was something that I wasn't really keen to do. I think it was through the University of Leicester or somewhere like that. Now, some of the I actually said no, I don't want to do that. Some of my colleagues, I think, should we say, didn't want to obviously cause the confrontation, so agreed to do it, and subsequently ended up dropping out of it. So there was probably undue costs that they should have, wouldn't have incurred had they not dropped out. So that was one example. I won't witter on too long because I tend to do that. The second thing was more personal again, but also linked to my colleague who was here earlier this morning, Mike Wilcox, also Graham Brander, and other members of the team, probably nationally as well, where Mr. Scott decided that it was going to be the best way of working now, where after 8 or 9, 10 years, we've been working in our various locations, and I think we've heard I was in Bournemouth, Graham was in Southampton, Mike was in Plymouth. We were dotted around.
Can I just ask you to slow down a little bit, just because we've got a stenographer.
Sorry. So we were dotted around the country, but we were all in our hometowns, if you like, home locations. Some of us worked out of offices, which I found fine. Other people were what they called LIW, so they could work from home. I'm trying to slow down again. Now, the time came where Mr. Scott decided that he didn't want that to happen, and that he was going to introduce what he called hub working. And I was told, along with Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Brander, etc., that we would now be going to a converted, I think the best way to describe it is a shed, that they were converting a shed, a Romex shed, that they were going to turn into an office for us to be office-based in the Swindon Stock Centre.
Sorry to interrupt you, but did you challenge Mr. Scott?
Oh, yes. It was mainly being driven at that time by Dave Pardo, and that's why my first comment was, I think it was being introduced via Dave Pardo, but at the request of John Scott. The request was that my colleague, as in Mike, who's in here this morning, would have a 300-mile round trip from Plymouth to Swindon every day at his own cost and at his own time. And basically, he couldn't fulfil that. And the question was, well, that's where the job location will now be. Okay. Myself, Graham, and another gentleman called Lester Chime, we decided that we would obviously, how can I say, not let Mr. Scott win, and we would go. We had a requirement. We had to be in Swindon at least 3 days a week. Obviously, the other 2 days we'd probably be out on investigations and inquiries, etc. So it was basically an office base in Swindon, which I managed to do for several months at our own costs or shared costs. We'd try and pick each other up if we could to try and keep those costs down. But Mike, unfortunately, had to leave the business because, in my eyes, it was a constructive dismissal. He had no option. He had no option.
So we'll move on then to the training you received when you joined the security team. When you joined the security team, did you have any experience of conducting criminal investigations?
No.
Did you have any knowledge of criminal law?
No.
And after you joined the team, it's correct that you went on a residential training course which lasted around 3 weeks.
As I recall, about 3 weeks, yes.
Do you remember who delivered this training?
I do. It was 2 gentlemen. The first one I don't remember so much, although I remember his name, was a guy called Andy Brown, and I think he was a Royal Mail based investigation manager. And the second one was a guy called Mick Matthews.
Is it right then that the topics you remember being covered included the PACE codes of practice, interviews, searches, and the retention and storing of exhibits?
Yes.
And you explained in your statement that you were tested to ensure that you passed the necessary levels of competence. Is that
That's
right?
Right. Yeah, we had a set of, as I remember, a set of books, pre-course books, I think, and that was to sort of, how can I say, give us a very basic start before we got on the course, and then there was a test at the beginning of the course, I think, and a test at the end of the course, and a pass mark.
Do you remember this course including disclosure?
Specifically, if I'm honest, no, but I'm sure it did. It was a bit of a, yeah, I think we'll go on to that a little bit later.
We will. And do you remember the Horizon system being rolled out around the same time that you joined the security team?
Yes, I don't specifically, again, recall, but I was a branch manager in Southampton at the time. We'd previously operated what was called an Echo computer system, and I remember the Horizon coming in around that sort of time. I can't recall if it was introduced before I left to join investigations or just shortly around the same sort of time.
And did you receive any training on Horizon in the residential training course?
Not on the residential training course, no.
After your initial training, did you shadow anyone in the security team before conducting a criminal investigation on your own?
Yeah, I didn't go straight into what we call first officer work. I would have shadowed Jeff Hall as my line manager, and obviously more experienced people like Mike Wilcox, for example, who would have been in the job a year or two at least before me.
And did you receive any further training or refresher training in the following 12 years you were a member of the security team?
Very minimal. I think a lot of it would have been either email-based, or I remember going on something called a defensive driving course, where it was if we were it seems a bit strange going after someone, but if the case, there was different forms that you could have, tape recorded or video cameras or CCTV surveillance. That's what I'm looking for, surveillance type work.
Then moving on then to the guidance which was available to you relating to the conduct of criminal investigations. If we could look at your witness statement again at page 5. So this is a list of policies and guidance documents you were provided with by the inquiry, and that goes on if we go down the page over to page 6 as well. If we go down to your paragraph 12, you say that in respect of all the numerous documents I've accessed, I can say a few look familiar, a few more were Royal Mail specific, and some documents I've never seen or recall, as I had possibly left the security team when they were produced and or circulated. And where were the policies kept so that post office employees could access them?
As I vaguely remember, there was something called an intranet site, and I think there was a security team database, and whether they were the same thing, I'm not sure, but there were things that you were able to get onto to obviously access these various policies and things.
That statement can come down, thank you. And did you have access to the Royal Mail Group policies?
I probably did, if I'm honest, especially at the start, because obviously we were part of the wider team of the Royal Mail Group security.
And you go on to say at paragraph 15 that any legislation, policies or relevant changes would have been communicated to you. Do you remember how they would have been communicated to you?
Again, it would have possibly been through a circular or an email attachment, or referring you to go to one of these sites to look at it.
So turning then please to casework compliance, one of the documents provided to you by the inquiry was a document titled Casework Management, and there are two versions of that policy, one from March 2000 and one from October 2002. And you say in your statement at paragraph 34 that you would have had no reason to doubt you were provided with those documents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall that these documents set out the need for two separate reports, one which would go to the discipline manager, which was known as the conduct or discipline report, and a second report known as the offender report, which would go to the legal services team?
I do, yes.
And what did you understand the purpose of the offender report to be?
The offender report would be, how can I say, the whole picture, everything including any exhibits or anything that we referred to during the interview, any failings we may have found, and I think at the end we put a summary if there was anything that we felt would, it was like a piece in bold that we would write, which was to do with anything that may have undermined the investigation, possibly something like that.
You've preempted
Sorry.
my question. No, not at all. So the inquiry also provided you with a number of emails dated 2011 from David Posnett relating to casework compliance. So is it right that you remember the introduction of compliance checks?
I do, yes.
And one of the attachments explains the information which should be included in the offender report. So could we please have Paul 00118101 on the screen? So we can see that it's titled Guide to the Preparation and Layout of Investigation Red Label Case Files, Offender Reports and Discipline Reports. And could we go to page 10, please? The bottom of page 10. So this section then you can see is titled Post-Interview. Paragraph 2.15 says details of failures in security, supervision, procedures and product integrity. And it says this must be a comprehensive list of all failures in security, supervision, procedures and product integrity. And it must be highlighted bold in the report. And where the investigator concludes there are no failures, a statement to this effect should be made and highlighted in bold. So what did you understand failures in product integrity to include?
Well, certainly now, Horizon itself, but at the time it would have been, I guess, our clients more than anything, I guess, product integrity, as to whether there was anything that would impact on those, but I can't really recall at the moment.
So when you say now, you would appreciate it would be Horizon. At the time, would you not have thought that would have included Horizon issues?
No, because, again, the message came out that there was, and I don't know where the message came from, because, again, everyone said the same, but line managers, colleagues, senior lead team manager, the business was that we had somebody who would give a witness statement from Fujitsu that in all the cases seemed to suggest that there was no product integrity with Horizon. I now know that that's not the case.
Would you have considered it to include allegations of problems with Horizon?
Again, it should have done, because I should have taken those a bit more seriously than we did, but I can only apologise.
So I'll move on then. Another one of the attachments to David Posnett's emails is the identification codes document, which you comment on at paragraphs 42 and 43 of your witness statement. Could we have that on the screen, please? And the reference is Paul 00118104. And can you see that it lists 7 identification codes?
I do, yes.
And is it still your position that you don't remember ever having seen this document?
I don't. It was in an attachment, I can't deny, that came to me. I think I say in my statement that having been, when it was circulated, been in the role for probably a number of years, then it seemed to be more that these things were being circulated for more new members of the team rather than experienced members of the team, and I'm not taking that as a disrespect to them or blowing my own trumpet, but I'd obviously been using the identification codes for quite a few years.
And at paragraph 44 of your statement, you say that you were required to record information, identification codes when you notified the police of criminal proceedings on an MPA 1 or MPA 2 form. Is that correct?
I do, but I think I've learned that it's now an MPA 3 or a 003 or something. I think it's different sides of the forms, etc.
Could we have document reference Paul 00119211 on screen, please? And I think this is an example of an MPA 1 form. You can see in the top right.
Yeah.
And this form is from the case of Julian Wilson, which is a case we'll come back to in more detail later. But you say at paragraph 80 of your statement that you completed this form after Mr. Wilson's interview. Do you remember that?
That I think would be normal, the normal process. So I can't remember it exactly, but I'm guessing I did. I think that was without being rude, I think that was the last occasion that I actually saw Mr. Wilson after the interview. So I think the details were taken from him at that time.
So on page 2 then of that form, we can see that there are number 7 boxes for ethnic appearance to be recorded. And the boxes are white European, dark European, Afro-Caribbean, Asian, Oriental, Arab, and unknown. And can you see that the language used here is different from the language in the identification codes document?
Without a doubt, yes.
So, for example, this form refers to white European, while the Post Office identification codes document refers to white-skinned European and gives a list of countries.
Yes.
So if I could take you back then to paragraph 80 of your witness statement, please. Paragraph 80 is on page 25. And just on to paragraph 80, please. So you say there that it was therefore a fairly standard practice to complete these antecedents MPA forms and was therefore answers of how the person best described their appearance along with all the other questions for its completion. You go on to then say, for example, an IC1 was stated in PACE as white-skinned European, English, Scottish, Welsh, French, German, Swedish, Norwegian, Polish, Russia. And that language there is the same language as the Post Office identification codes document. Do you agree with that?
Quite possibly. It was something I Googled on when I was doing my statement, to be truthful. I'd always previously used the identification on the back of the MPA 002-3 on the back where you just showed a moment ago. And whilst you're filling the form in theory, going across from right to left to right, sorry, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So I would just have used that form when I was completing, or asked the person I was asking the questions to, suspect, whatever you want to call it, what they best described themselves as.
So when you refer there to IC1 was stated in pace, is that what are you referring to? Are you referring to the MPA1 form?
No, I'm referring to the fact that whilst I was obviously I saw Mr. Posnett's email and hadn't previously seen it as my recollection was. I hadn't opened it, and if I had, I think I would have challenged that I'd seen that and was not, how can I say, entirely comfortable with the email that was part of the inquiry, and basically thought, well, that's not a document I opened or used. So in preparation for my statement, I think, although I'd obviously mentioned I probably should have just left it at, I've gone across the top of the MPA form, would be my normal thing of doing that. And as I say, after a number of years in the role, you tended to have an idea of what the code, and predominantly, I think I say in my statement as well, is the majority of our people would have been an IC, or was known or considered themselves an IC1.
So despite using, in paragraph 80, the same language as the identification codes document, is your evidence that actually what you were referring to were the boxes on the MPA forms?
Yes, I use the MPA form.
And thank you, that can come down. So I would like to move on then to ask you some questions about the involvement of post office investigators following the identification of an apparent shortfall at audit. So you explain in your statement that an investigator would sometimes attend an audit if they had instigated or requested it. Can you explain the circumstances in which you would have requested an audit?
A couple of reasons. One, going back to pension and allowance frauds that were apparent. If we had one case where we had a complaint that we understood that the pension and allowance fraud, the suspect, I shall say, was looking in the obituaries to find out when someone had passed away, and it was when going back to the old pension book scenario, and they would look in the drawer to find their pension book and subsequently think, unfortunately, they've passed away, we'll steal that book because they won't be coming in to collect it, and systematically cashed the dockets, etc. So things like that, we would have obviously instigated an audit. I think I had another occasion where, and I think that's part of the evidence here, where a holiday relief had contacted the post office to say that they believed that there would be a shortage at an office, and the other thing we had was cash, overnight cash holdings. A lot of times, there was, when Horizon came in, there was occasions where they would do their daily cash declarations, or they would show their cash declarations at the end of day, end of week, end of trading period. And let's say hypothetically they said that they had £50,000 in the branch, but the post office knew that their outgoings for the customers that are on a regular basis coming in was £20,000. They may request for some cash to be returned to the central cash centre, if you like. They would make a phone call to the cash centre and say, could you return that cash? And if it came back, great. They may make another phone call saying you didn't send that cash back. Can you send some £20,000-30,000 back, etc., etc. And eventually the money never came. So there would be a suspicion possibly that that money wasn't actually held at the branch. So it may, on the inquiry of the investigation, instigate an audit to be requested.
So then, in respect of Crown offices, if we could have your statement up again at page 8, please, paragraph 19. You say that the same approach was taken in respect of both Crown offices and sub-postmasters who were under investigation. You then go on to say, if we could just go, yes, thank you. The only thing that changed, in my opinion, was the actual number of audits carried out at the Crown offices seemed to reduce over the years as the staffing numbers reduced within audits, as it had also done with the security team. And you go on to say that that was because of cutbacks. The last sentence there, where you say the post office's focus on Crown office losses for branch managers was another factor that meant the security team had to prioritise their inquiries around the offices with the consistently worst or highest losses to the business, including the worst Crown offices. Can you just help us with what you mean by that?
Sorry, it's a bit ambiguous, isn't it? Basically, when I joined the security team, there was about, let's say, 50 of us working to 7 team leaders. When I left, there was two team leaders and maybe 15 or 16 of us working. In the same way, the audit teams had similar numbers. There would be fairly regular audits of sub-offices, Crown offices, at various periods. With the reduction in staffing numbers, obviously the frequency of audits at any particular branch reduced quite dramatically. And there was also a very much a focus, because I was a Crown Office branch manager myself, on ensuring that you maintained losses to a minimum as much as you possibly could, and that you undertook as a branch manager spot checks on tills, on particular stocks. If there was obviously a clerk that was balancing not as well as the others, you obviously try to assist them with additional training or find out to try and get to the reasons why. So there was more of a focus within the branch office network, away from the audits section, if you like.
So moving on then to interviews, you explain in your statement that you conducted both voluntary interviews and interviews at police stations. And at paragraph 7 of your statement, if we can just go back to page 4, please. At the end of that paragraph, you say that even if it was at a police station, you would have been involved, as we were a well-known, recognised interviewing authority with the police. Did you understand that to be a technical term?
It was something, I think, when I joined that, I don't know whether it came from Jeff Hall or came from my team leader or whatever at the time, but as far as I was led to believe, that we were a similar organisation, a bit like the DWP, who had their own investigatory people involved, and that the police were aware of Post Office and DWP investigation teams, and that obviously we were recognised as that if we should call and speak to anyone.
So you'd heard someone else refer to the Post Office security team as a well-known, recognised interviewing
I had,
authority?
yes. Yeah, and that's the only place I got it from, if you like, but yes.
And then moving down to paragraph 8, please. You explained then that you would always give disclosure to any legal representative who was present in either suspected criminal or voluntary interviews. And what would this disclosure typically include?
I guess everything, as far as I could be aware of that was available that we were going to put to the suspect at interview. So whether it be Horizon printouts or personnel printouts or anything that we'd done prior to the investigation, anything on the day, audit result, any signed confession, or confession is probably not the right word, but if the auditor had written out a statement, if someone had made an admission, sorry, that's the right word, yeah.
And what about in circumstances where the individual you're interviewing was unrepresented? What would you do in terms of giving disclosure?
I'll be privately honest, I don't remember that we did, if I'm honest.
You don't remember interviewing someone that was unrepresented, or you don't remember giving disclosure to someone who's unrepresented?
Don't necessarily remember giving disclosure to someone. I think it may have been just as part of the interview. I may be wrong.
Was there a reason for the difference in approach?
No, I've no idea.
And after you completed the interview, would you typically carry out further investigation before completing the discipline and offender report?
If something was brought up during the interview, then yes, generally I would go and try and corroborate what was said.
That can come down, thank you. And is it right that then following the initial investigation, the case papers, including the offender report, would be forwarded on to the legal team who would advise whether prosecution was appropriate?
Yes, that would it would go generally through the casework manager for the compliance checks to be made, and for obviously a score to be given to us on each particular case that went through them. Sometimes it may be that the line manager may look at it if he was coming down for a one-to-one or anything like that, but the ultimate place it was going was the legal team for advice, basically.
And who made the decision to prosecute?
Well, the legal team, they would make a recommendation whether they felt that the evidence was sufficient or not to realise whatever prospect it be, a good or bad prospect of conviction, and subsequently that would then get the authority or rubber stamp, shall we say, as it's been disclosed, I think, or as said, is from the senior authorising manager within the security team, I think, or prior to that, personnel team, I think it was said.
So at paragraph 27 of your statement, you say that you have no idea of any tests being applied by those making prosecution or charging decisions. You say, I always believed the decision was only made if there was sufficient evidence to suggest beyond reasonable doubt that a criminal offence had been committed by the individual. And where did that understanding of the test come from?
Exactly as I said prior to you reading that, I understood that it was a decision or any test that was applied was the test was applied by the criminal lawyer that was looking at the case papers.
And where did you get that understanding of the test, that it was beyond reasonable doubt?
I would suggest possibly again through mentor, line manager, somewhere like that.
And did you have any involvement in the decision to prosecute someone?
No.
And were you ever involved in recommending appropriate charges?
As I recall, towards the latter years, I'll say, of my time in security, I think there may have been a suggestion or an idea that we may put something within the papers, but I can't recall whether I ever did, because I'm not sure I was ever that confident of what I would be recommending would be correct. I think it was trying to give us a bit more, I don't know, knowledge-based perhaps, that, oh, this is a theft charge or this is a false account. I mean, I probably would know, but I wouldn't know what act it was under or anything like that. So no, it was probably something that may have been suggested we might wish to, but I don't remember actually doing it.
So could I take you to a document with the reference Paul 00166128, please? So we can see that this is your 2009 to 2010 full year review. And at the time your manager was Jason Collins.
Yes.
And if we could go to page 6 of that document, please. And if we just scroll down. And scroll down a bit more, sorry, Frankie. So we see there that the title is Behaviour and Competency 1 Information, and the name is Post Office I Challenge to Make Things Better. Was that one of your personal objectives at the time in the security team?
I would have probably said so, yes.
If we could go over to the next page then, please, and scroll down towards the bottom. Paragraph 6 then, I understand this to be your entry. During November 2009, Mr. Jarnell Singh criminal law team suggested 5 theft charges in a case of mine against. I challenged these charges. I had previously advised Mr. Singh that there were no branch trading statements available. Not only did I challenge the suggested charges, but I also suggested an appropriate charge under the Fraud Act 2006 should be considered. So is it the case then that you would have input into some of these decisions as to appropriate charges?
Not that I recall, no. Obviously, I have written this, as I said, under what act or not. And the only thing I can say is that I've challenged Mr. Singh because he was suggesting possibly a false accounting charge, but there was no branch trading statements available. So I've made that challenge. Where I've managed to get the next bit from of suggesting an appropriate charge, maybe I was digging from friends, colleagues or management or something, but it's nothing I can definitely say or recall.
So when you refer to digging from friends, colleagues or management, do you mean in respect of what the appropriate charge might be?
Probably, yes.
And was it common for you as an investigator to challenge the post office lawyers in respect of the appropriate charges?
No, not at all. Well, certainly not the majority. Maybe more so towards Mr. Singh than any of the others, if I'm honest. But I'm not saying anything specifically there. But I can't answer that way.
Why do you say in respect of Mr. Singh more than the others?
And again, it's my own perception. He didn't perhaps come over as quite as competent as Debbie Howshine. I can't remember what her new married name was, but she was Howshine. Debbie Staple, Rob Wilson, Juliet McFarland. They all seem to have in my opinion, a higher level of competency.
So is it the case then that it would have been primarily Mr. Singh that you would have challenged, but not the other person?
I would have thought so. If I wouldn't have thought there would have, well, I may be wrong, you may prove me wrong, that there was ever a challenge towards any of the others. I wouldn't have thought.
Thank you, that can come down. So I want to turn then to ask you some questions about the obligations on an investigator. And one of the policies listed in your statement is the Disclosure of Unused Material, Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act 1996 Codes of Practice policy, and that's dated May 2001. And could we have that on screen, please? The reference is Paul 00104762. And we just look at section 1 then. The purpose of the policy is to ensure that security managers know and understand the investigation procedures in relation to the disclosure of unused material as described in the Criminal Procedures and Investigation Act 1996 Codes of Practice. Do you recognise this document?
Not specifically, but I'm sure I have seen it or would have seen it.
And if we look down then at section 3, at 3.2, in the first bullet point, it describes an investigator as a person involved in the conduct of a criminal investigation involving consignia. All investigators have a responsibility for carrying out the duties imposed on them under this code, including in particular recording information and retaining records of information and other material. So do you agree that at the point of advising whether a prosecution test was met, the legal services team would have been reliant on you as the investigator to provide them with all the relevant material?
Yes, I do.
And that document can come down, thank you. Is it correct that once the decision had been made to proceed with the prosecution, that the decision would then be relayed back to you along with an advice on further evidence which was considered to be necessary?
It would, yes.
And was it your responsibility to then obtain this further evidence?
Yes, it was.
And were you conscious that there was an obligation on you as an investigator to pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry, whether these pointed towards or away from a suspect?
I was, yes.
And were you aware that this obligation extended to material held in the hands of third parties, such as Fujitsu?
Yes.
So can we please have your witness statement back on screen at page 12 at paragraph 32, please? just towards the bottom of that page, please, at paragraph 32. So, starting at my recollection, which is about a third of the way down that paragraph, say my recollection of the point above, which refers to disclosure in the hands of third parties, as to whether and in what circumstances evidence should be sought from third parties who might hold relevant evidence, and in particular Fujitsu. Where shortfalls were identified in branch was often through discussions with the legal team, casework manager and line manager, team leader. Was that any request for Fujitsu data was only when this became available to us? What do you mean by that, when it became available to us?
I'm not sure in the very early days that, and I'm saying probably on the introduction of Horizon 2000 to 1, 2, etc., that I have any recollection of us having any kind of contact whatsoever with Fujitsu. I may be wrong, but certainly from my level or point of view. And then it gradually came to, I think, the fruition that there was two, as I vaguely recall, and I may be completely wrong, but there was two ways that you could look at the Horizon data, which was either by requesting Fujitsu an ARQ data, and I've got something in the back of my mind that whether this was later in the day or before, that we had a thing called credence that we could go on to as well. And I think the point I was trying to get across here is that when I would have spoken with, let's say, initially my line manager or casework manager, depending on where the investigation was or what type of investigation it was, etc., I would have probably been looking for some guidance as to what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing with regards to that. There was obviously a restricted number of ARQ requests we could make, so should we look at credence and try to find what we were looking for the postmaster or against the postmaster?
So when you say that at some point you became aware that you could request data from Fujitsu, at what point, what year can you remember?
I can't remember. I know we would have to request it, and again it's in my statement. It's a certain part that we would not have direct contact with Fujitsu, and I think I put in my statement, I couldn't be 100% why, but I think it was so that they didn't get inundated with loads of people contacting them and not knowing who it was. There was a single point of contact, which I believe now is the casework manager, which later on became, and in my statement I mentioned a guy called Mark Dinsdale and a lady called Jane Owen, and I think I wasn't sure if there was a form we completed or an email we sent, and then they would complete a form and then subsequently order the ARQ request.
So in what circumstances would you request data from Fujitsu when you were aware this was available?
I'm struggling to remember exactly when, because all the ARQ data, and that's I think yesterday it actually came out, shall we say, and I think it was something that I added to my statement today at the start of today. And although I added it because I sent the email on Monday about adding to my statement before I learnt yesterday, was that the ARQ data that I had in whatever case or however many cases, from obviously analysing it or looking at it, I'd never personally found any of these bugs, errors or defects.
So the question was a little bit different. The question was, in what circumstances would you decide to make a request to Fujitsu for example, ARQ data?
I think if there was a time span of an audit, or if there was an allegation that there was something wrong, or that we were trying to, if you like, prove that what happened at the audit was correct, or if you like, to try and corroborate our evidence, I guess.
Would you ever request data from Fujitsu to try to confirm what a sub-postmaster had said in an interview?
Yes, I had, yes. I'm sure I had.
And what types of data were you aware of that could be requested from Fujitsu?
Well, I only knew that there was one.
And is that ARQ data?
Yeah.
So you then go on to say in your statement at paragraph 32 that requests were not necessarily made in every case, as they were not always deemed necessary if admissions were made. So is it your position that where a sub-postmaster made admissions in interview that you wouldn't have requested evidence from Fujitsu?
I think I would have taken the advice again from the casework and legal team in my report to if you like, take a guidance or direction. Wrongly, I know now, wrongly, because again, as the last sentence is I had no reason to confirm that any of these, I had no knowledge of these things. So if we'd had an admission, we had the evidence, the audit was showing shortages, we'd looked at the credence possibly and all those things, I'm not sure that I would have in all cases, no.
Then moving to paragraph 55 of your statement at page 17, please. And paragraph 55, just further down the page. You say, I never recall any of my cases suggesting where a shortfall had been identified and the relevant SPM manager or assistants or Crown Office employees attributed the shortfall to problems with Horizon, that ARC data requested from Fujitsu was requested as a matter of course. And this was the case at Astwood Bank, which is the case of Gillian Wilson.
Yes.
And you go on to say, it was my belief and that of my colleagues, I would guess, that shortfalls could not actually be attributed to Horizon. Is that the reason then why you didn't request the ARQ data?
Yes.
And looking back now, can you see any problem with that approach?
Massive, yes.
And what problem is it?
Well, whilst I say massive because of the fact that I now am aware that there were bugs, errors and defects, which at that time and up until not that long ago, I actually still felt the same. Wrongly, I hasten to add. But although if I had have requested that data, now learning yesterday that there was more than one form of ARQ data that could have been requested. Now, I don't know who's, and I'm not trying to ascertain blame here, but who knew that there was more than one, or whether that Fujitsu knew but the post office didn't, or the post office did but it was more costly or whatever, I don't know. But I think because Mr. Wilson raised that there was he had no explanation, etc., then yes, I wish I had have requested it.
And so in cases where there was an allegation that there was problems with Horizon, would you take the same approach?
I would, but the frustration for me is that had I done that, I'm still not sure that I would have found any problems within there, which is hard for me to... I wish I had on every single case, but I'm frustrated in the fact that had I done it, which I didn't in Mr. Wilson's case, whether I would have found anything different.
So you mentioned that you recall a limit on the number of ARQ requests which could be provided by Fujitsu. Do you ever recall being told that you couldn't have ARQ data because of these limits?
I do. I'm not so sure about being told I could never have them, but I certainly recall being told that we'd hit the monthly limit and that they may have to fall over into the following month or months to come.
So is it the position that you could have it but at a later date?
Yes, generally, yes.
Do you ever remember a case where someone came back to you and said, no, we've reached the limit, you can't have it on this case?
Not specifically, no. Whether they would have said, do you really need this data? Or raised a question or how can I say, a query in my mind, whether I needed it or not, I don't know. But I can't specifically say no, it was declined.
And you go on to say in your statement that where ARQ data was available to you, then you would have spent time reviewing it to look for potential issues. Did you receive any training on how to interpret ARQ data?
No, It was basically part of the statement that we received that we ended up becoming, pretty much from what I can gather, self-taught.
And when you refer to a statement, sorry, what are you referring to?
I think if we got ARQ data in the early days or later days, I think there was more than one person that would supply the ARQ data. One I remember was Penny Thomas. It would sometimes, within her witness statement, I think, set out the columns, for use of a better word, of the first column might be the log on of the clerk, the next might be the transaction, whether it was a served customer or a transfer or cash in or cash declaration, and it was specifically in there. And obviously it was a bit like an Excel spreadsheet that you were able to sort and filter it into amounts or log on codes, etc. So it was, as far as I remember, pretty much self-taught.
And so what would you be looking for when you're looking for potential issues?
Well, if for example, there was a high increase in a cash declaration from a Tuesday to a Wednesday. So on a Tuesday, it was saying £10,000, and on a Wednesday, it was saying £30,000. There's obviously been an increase in £20,000, and I would be looking to see if they'd received any cash in, or I would be looking to see if there'd been any high levels of business deposits that would obviously, how can I say, equate for why that cash had gone up by £20,000, or if all the transactions were, I've sold a stamp, I've paid out £10 here or £100 there, ups and downs, etc. It would probably say, well, I can't. There is no reason why that's gone up by that amount, or the cash declarations changed by such a large amount.
And do you think that it's adequate that you were left to be self-taught on how to interpret ARQ data?
No, not at all.
Did you ever ask for any help on how to interpret ARQ data?
I can't recall I did, no. I think it was just considered that that was it. But I should have asked.
And then further on in your statement, you say that you understood that if ARQ data was obtained, you assumed it was unlikely to have been provided to the defence. Is that correct?
As far as I'm not sure. I think there was occasions where whether the defence requested it, whether we copied the discs, or there was a way of doing that. I can't be 100%, but or if it was just extracts that we took from the ARQ data, if there was something that, if you like, raised a query and it became part of the evidence as from ARQ data 1, 2, 3. I have extracted this particular day and it is now as part of my exhibit GRT1 or whatever.
So in circumstances where it hasn't been requested by the defence, but you've requested it as the investigator, so you're understanding that it wouldn't have been provided to the defence in those situations?
I don't know, because of course it would have gone up to the criminal law team, and if it was part of the defence, if you like, I would have expected that it would have been given to the defence. I'm not saying whether it was or it wasn't, but I would have expected it to be if it was within evidence.
So I want to move on then to ask you some questions about the role of the disclosure officer. Could we have the disclosure of unused material policy back on screen, please? The reference is POL 00104762. And this is the policy we looked at earlier in relation to investigators. On page 2 then, please. At the first bullet point on this page, it explains that the disclosure officer is the person responsible for examining material retained during an investigation, revealing material to legal services during the investigation and any criminal proceedings resulting from it, and certifying to legal services that this has been done. Normally, the investigator and the disclosure officer will be the same person. Did you understand that to be the case in the majority of cases you were involved in?
It wasn't clear. I would say this is probably my least knowledge in the role. I've obviously seen and understand that as the investigator, I was also the disclosure officer.
And sorry, just to query.
Sorry.
when you say least knowledgeable, do you mean in relation to your role as a disclosure officer?
Disclosure officer, yes. I was always advised, and part of training, coming out of training and being mentored, if you like, and that you had to retain everything, and everything had a place, if that makes sense. Whether it was in the right place, I often would ask for some assistance, whether it was on the right schedule, was it unused, was it used, was it disclosable, etc. But I always was aware that everything was retained. As I recall, it was put onto the schedules of CS or GS or whatever it was at the time, 006 Cs, Ds and Es, and put as part of the casework file, if you like.
Sorry, just to clarify, the 6C, 6D and 6E, is that the schedule of unused material? The non-sensitive unused. Yeah. Then the next one was sensitive unused material, and then the last one was the disclosure officer's report. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And when you said that you would ask for assistance on where to record things, who would you ask for that assistance from?
I think it would have been either the criminal law person, lawyer, or my line manager at the time.
But do you now accept that, having seen the documents provided to you by the inquiry, that you were the disclosure officer in a number of cases that you were investigating?
I accept that now, yes.
And thank you, that can come down. Did you understand that where you were the disclosure officer, you had a duty to draw material to the attention of the prosecutor, where you were in any doubt as to whether it might undermine the prosecution case or assist the defence?
Again, I believe so, because I was told you had to, everything had a place, if that makes sense.
And when we were talking earlier then about having requested the ARQ data, would you understand that that would also have to be retained? You were the disclosure officer?
Yes, yeah.
And where would you have recorded then the things that you'd considered during the course of an investigation?
Well, I'm saying, would it not have been part of the case papers that were submitted if there was ARQ data? Because it would have been an exhibit of Penny Thomas's.
And say that it wasn't an exhibit, it hadn't been exhibited by anyone in Fujitsu, you just considered it?
Then yes, I guess so I've ordered ARQ data. It's not in evidence, and it should be on the schedule. Okay. Yes, I agree.
So I would like then to turn now, please, to your involvement in the investigation of Mr. Julian Wilson, who was the sub-postmaster at Astwood Bank Post Office. Could we please have the judgment in Hamilton and others on the screen? Our reference is Paul 00113278, and it's page 43. Thank you. And if we just go down the page a little bit. So his appeal was brought posthumously by his widow, Mrs. Karen Wilson, and his convictions were quashed by the Court of Appeal in 2021. At paragraph 177, the court observed that the Post Office accepted that this was an unexplained shortfall case, and that evidence from Horizon was essential to Mr. Wilson's case. Based on the papers available from the criminal proceedings, there is nothing to suggest any ARQ data was obtained. The Post Office did not investigate any of the criticisms of Horizon made by Mr. Wilson historically and during his detailed interview. There was no evidence to corroborate the Horizon evidence. There was no proof of an actual loss as opposed to a Horizon-generated shortage. And the Post Office, at paragraph 178, conceded that the prosecution was unfair, but the court also concluded that his prosecution was an affront to justice and his convictions were quashed. Thank you, that can come down. Is it correct then that you were the lead investigator in this case?
I was, yes.
And you explain in your statement that you became involved in the case after an audit which took place on the 11th of September 2008 identified an apparent shortfall.
Yes, that's right.
And is it right then that you spoke to the auditor, Mr. David Patrick, while he was at the branch on the day the audit took place?
I can't recall, but quite possible. It may. I'm not sure if it was myself or it would have been my team leader at the time, and then the case was raised from the report. Because generally, if there was an audit, obviously, if I was aware of an audit, I may well have been in attendance, or I would have been aware an audit was taking place, and they may have contacted me. On this occasion, again, it was, I think, outside of my normal area, and it may well have been that the auditor had informed the contracts manager, who in turn would have informed Jason Collins, if that was my line manager at the time, and subsequently then would have come to me. I can't be 100% sure whether I would have spoken directly on the day to David Patrick or not.
So can you remember asking the auditors to obtain a signed statement from Mr. Wilson?
No.
Could we then just go to the offender report, and it is, the reference is Paul 000448803. And could we go to the third page of that report at the bottom? So we can see that the offender report was completed by you on the 2nd of December.
Yes.
And if we go back to the bottom of the first page, please. And at the bottom paragraph, you say, upon confirmation of the shortage by the auditor, the postmaster was advised that he was precautionary suspended on the authority of Mr. Glenn Chester. I was also contacted at this time, and I asked the auditors to obtain a signed statement confirming these facts from the postmaster. So do you accept then?
I accept that then, yes. Yeah. I don't know who he would have spoken to first, maybe Glenn Chester and then myself, but I accept that, yes, that was the case then.
And do you remember asking any questions about the circumstances in which Mr. Wilson made this statement to the auditors?
Not that I can recall, no.
And did you give any consideration to the possibility that the auditors may have said or done something that made both the written note unreliable?
I didn't, no.
Sir, if that would be a convenient moment to have a short break of 10 minutes.
Yes, by all means.
Thank you.
So we'll start again at 3:45?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Mr. Thomas, we've just been speaking about the audit that had taken place in Mr. Wilson's case. So then moving on, is it correct that you attended Mr. Wilson's home address with Graham Brander on the 15th of September 2008?
Yes, I did.
And was that to conduct a voluntary search?
Yes, I think, as I recall, I'd spoken to Mr. Wilson on the telephone and had asked him if he was happy to allow us to do a voluntary search, and he agreed. And we went to his home address prior to going to his solicitor's office to conduct the interview.
And you conducted an interview later that same day, is that
Yes.
correct? So can we have the first part of the interview transcript on screen, please? The reference is Paul 000-50140. And just at the top then we can see the interviewing officers were you and Mr. Brander, and the other persons present were Mr. Wilson's solicitor and Donna Evans, who was the branch secretary of the Federation of Sub-Postmasters.
Yes.
If we go down the page to the bottom of page 1 then, please. So at 10 minutes and 40 seconds into the interview, we can see that Mr. Wilson was asked for his version of events.
Yep.
And the second line up from the bottom, he explains, when I balance every Wednesday as required by Post Office Limited. Some weeks it was up, some weeks it was down. Over the page, please. And I kept a record of all those transactions as to what was up and down during, my period as postmaster. I at one time had a manager who's the line manager in those days. I think they were called Paul Van Toozy, and I raised the question of misbalances with him, and I'd been keeping a record. So can you see that immediately he raised the fact that he'd been having problems with Horizon?
With misbalancing, yeah.
And he said to Mr. Van Toozy, could the system be wrong? Or are we doing, he said, no, the system cannot be wrong. There's nothing wrong with the system. So he was told by that manager that the system couldn't cause his misbalances.
Clearly, yes.
He goes on then to say, perhaps 2 years ago we had a letter sent round from the Federation as to whether anybody was experiencing misbalances. I said that I had, and I actually then was asked to submit to the Federation copies of trading reports. So he's then explained that he's also reported problems to the Federation of Sub-Postmasters.
Yes.
And then going down to 13 minutes and 10 seconds in the middle of the second line, he said, I also then had a BDM, a manager called, and his name was Keith Bridges. I also raised the fact I was having these problems with balancing, and I had noticed that when I declared the cash each night on a Saturday, Friday/Saturday, when you declared the cash, there was never balanced exactly. And I noticed on Monday the discrepancy had increased. So he's then explaining he's reported problems to a third person. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
If we then turn over the page to page 4, please. And just down at 22 minutes in, we see your initials there.
Yes.
And you then say, well, obviously, in respect of the Horizon system, obviously it's been in for quite a number of years now. We've had, shall we say, instances or allegations by postmasters who have claimed that the system's not perhaps working correctly, which may have triggered off your letters originally out from the Federation. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, again, I think it perhaps became that it was, I don't know, 2008, something like that, that a few people had now started to cite the Horizon as a reason possibly for losses. I was still of the impression, and I believe the majority of my colleagues were as well, that there wasn't anything wrong with the Horizon system. And I think in the actual tape summary, as I think at some point I may mention when he said about saying to the two managers that had visited his office, had he explained to them how much he was out or what was the loss, or was it a general question of could there be anything wrong with Horizon? And I think, I may stand corrected, but I think he just said he hadn't mentioned the exact amounts, but he was just asking if something could be wrong with Horizon.
You go on to say, I think possibly speaking to Donna, since that some of those things that have been generated by those questions from postmasters weren't founded in the Horizon system, in that they'd been up to no good. Are you referring there to Donna Evans?
I'm referring to Donna Evans in that I think he had spoken to her, or that he said I think that he'd heard from the Federation, and she was obviously from the Federation. And I say wrongly now, the allegations or the ones that the people that were saying there was something wrong with the Horizon system, as far as I was aware, concerned or whatever, was that there hadn't been any evidence to corroborate what a number of people, some people were now saying about the system.
So do you see there that it seems like you're going one step further and you're saying actually people had been up to no good and they were alleging that it was the system at fault?
Yes, so I was completely wrong.
And
I
when-
was believing I was believing because I believed, and I thought the whole business believed, and that Fujitsu were giving evidence to say there was nothing wrong with the Horizon system, that clearly that people had been up to no good. I know that's not the case now, and I apologise for the wording in there as part of that interview.
do you accept that even if that had been the case, that was an inappropriate thing to say in his interview?
I do, yes.
So can we look then at the second part of the interview transcript, and the reference is Paul 000050128. So we can see the interview continued later on the same day, and the same people were present. And at 6 minutes 57 seconds in at the bottom of the page, it's you speaking again, and you say, at what stage do you think you would have been in a position, or you're going to get in a position, to repay the post office the money that was clearly missing? So are you asking Mr. Wilson to pay the shortfall at that stage?
Not at all, no. What I was inferencing is the fact that it's been his suggestion was that he'd been changing the accounts for a period of around 5 years, which he says as part of the interview, and obviously on the thing that he'd spoken to the auditor about, which I wasn't there, so I don't know how accurate that was or not. But I think my concern was that when was he going to be in a position, because if this audit hadn't taken place and we'd gone to 6 years or 7 years or whatever, rightly or wrongly under the terms of his contract, he was going to have a responsibility to repay the money. So I think what I was saying is, at what stage did he think he was going to be in a position to make good, as under the terms of his contract, that money? I wasn't actually asking him, can you give me the money now, sort of thing.
But was that your responsibility as an investigator, or was that a contractual matter?
It depended. If it was a non-criminal inquiry, it would be a contractual matter. If it was a criminal inquiry, then if it went to court, then we would always say that under the terms, as an investigator, under the terms of your contract, you have an obligation to repay the money. It wasn't you have to repay the money, because he may not have been in a position to do so.
And given the issues that Mr. Wilson had explained to you that he was having with the Horizon system, why did you think it was appropriate to ask that question at that point?
I think it was just the fact that perhaps if the audit had taken place at year 2, it would have been a lot less, and if it was at year 7, it would have been a lot more. It was just asked in, I guess I was asked in, he'd raised it with a couple of area managers that had come into his branch, and rightly or wrongly, I don't know what they did. I'm sure after the interview, I tried to contact them. I've got a feeling that one was long gone, and I got hold of one, and he had no recollection or something, I don't know. But I was unsure as to, I think what I was trying to get at was how long was it going. It was not going to get better by the look of it.
At this point, you it's the very start of the criminal investigation, so you aren't even sure whether this is an actual loss or not. Do you think it's appropriate to ask him whether he's in a position to repay at that stage?
Yes, quite possibly then.
So can we then go to what happened after this interview then? Can that interview transcript come down, please? So you say in your statement that you didn't think any references made by Mr. Wilson to Horizon or documents circulated by the Federation of Sub-Postmasters had any significance, as you had no doubts about Horizon. Was that correct? That was your position?
That was correct at the time, yes.
You also referred a moment ago to trying to make some inquiries with people that Mr. Wilson may have had contact with.
Yes.
And what inquiries do you remember making?
I can't exactly, but I do, in refreshing myself with the papers of the tape transcripts, which I think I also said, I'm not even sure that I transcribed them personally in the way that they're laid out, but I've got no reason to doubt what's in the transcripts at all. But I'm sure in the back of my mind I have recollection of trying to contact, and I think I may have even said to Mr. Wilson my plan was to try and see if they, because I think I asked him were they still, because obviously he said one was an area manager, then it was replaced by another one, which was no different than perhaps in the security team going on to different roles, etc. But because I was out of area, all those three gentlemen's names that he brought up, they weren't known to me, so I had to obviously find out who they were and if they still worked in the business and what was...
Can I just ask you to
Sorry.
slow down a little bit for the
Sorry.
transcriber? So is it the case that you remember making contact or trying to make contact with these
I
people?
do have a vague recollection of trying to make contact, yes.
And
And the vague recollection may be that, as I think, I could get hold of one of the three.
so we took you a moment ago to the offender report. If we could go back to that document, please. It's Paul 000444803. And it was dated the 2nd of December 2008. So that was around 11 weeks then after the interview. And you explained in your statement and a moment ago that you thought there was maybe a period where you were absent from work and there was a delay. So when you were writing this report, would you have refreshed your memory of the case before drafting it?
I would have obviously referred to the tape summaries very much, and obviously the case papers that I had, the jacketed case papers as well. What I'm unsure is and obviously I probably would have been marked down on compliance here, because the delay, which I found unusual. And I'd like to say that I did all the necessary inquiries during that period of time, but I do remember speaking to or trying to contact those gentlemen, but I don't know why it was such a long time.
Do you remember trying to contact them before you wrote the offender report?
I would have said so, yes.
At the bottom of page 2 of the offender report, so you summarise the interview that you had with Mr. Wilson, and just at the bottom of that paragraph you say, Mr. Wilson explained how this had been common practice for the past 5 years or so. He was asked if he had considered theft by his employees, given the fact it appeared the shortages were a regular occurrence with no explanation or corresponding errors ever appearing apparent. He said he'd not believed this to be the case. You don't include there the allegations that he made about the Horizon system. Do you accept that?
I accept that, yes.
And why did you not include those details in your summary of the interview?
I don't know, and I think I also said, I'm not going to say I didn't write this report, because I believe I probably did, but I don't recall doing the tape summaries, but yeah, I accept that it's not in there.
So the end of this report that we looked at has your signature.
Then it's my report,
And then if we can go down to the bottom of page 3, please. You put in bold there, there did not appear to be any further failings in security procedures or product integrity that directly affect this case. Do you think that that's a fair reflection given what Mr. Wilson said to you in his interview?
No.
And why do you think you positively put that assertion in the report?
Because I should have put in there regarding what was raised with the Federation and the document that I think that they referred to about postmasters raising issues. And the only reason I can say that I didn't was because of my own personal belief that there wasn't anything wrong with Horizon, and that's not an acceptable answer probably, but that's all I can offer.
Do you also accept that you don't provide any details of conducting further inquiries in that report?
Yeah, I accept that.
And why is that the case if you said that you had contacted his managers?
I don't know, that's completely wrong.
Could it be because you didn't conduct those inquiries?
No, I definitely am sure I did speak to at least one of the three gentlemen, but to recall the actual conversation, I can't recall that, but...
That can come down, thank you. So later in December, the post office applied for a restraint order against Mr. Wilson. Did you have any involvement in the financial investigation side or the subsequent confiscation proceedings?
No, we'd done the report as you've just described, and it obviously went through the casework team to the legal team and then back and then through the court process. And then it was during the court process, I believe that the financial investigation unit got involved, dependent on whether any repayment had been made or seen to be made or not.
So moving on in time, then you were CC'd into a memo from Jarnell Singh dated the 6th of January 2009, and the reference for this document is Paul 00044 If we could have it on screen, please. So it's to the fraud team, and we can see that you're CC'd. If we go to the bottom of that page, please. So Jarnell Singh says there, if the defendant should elect trial, or if the magistrates refuse jurisdiction, or if a not guilty plea is entered, the investigation manager should obtain and associate all necessary statements and exhibits. And he lists a number of statements which appear to be necessary, but also says the investigation manager should also consider whether there's any other areas which can usefully be covered. Was it your responsibility then to conduct those further inquiries or consider if anything else was necessary?
I guess it was, yes.
And did you consider whether anything was necessary at that point?
I'll be honest, no, I didn't.
Did you read this memo from Jarnell Singh?
I would have done, yes. I think a copy would have probably been within the case papers as well.
Mr. Wilson subsequently appeared at Redditch Magistrates Court and pleaded not guilty on the 4th of March 2009. Is it correct that you then prepared the committal bundle in this case?
I believe so, yes.
And as part of this bundle, I think you provided a witness statement on the 12th of March 2009. Could we have Paul 00044 on screen, please? So we can see that this is dated the 12th of March 2009. So this is some period of time after you've conducted the interview. Would you have referred back to the interview summaries to compile your witness statement?
I would have thought so, yes.
So going over the page at page 2 then, please. And going down the page, please. So at the bottom of that page, again, you summarise the interview with Mr. Wilson. You say, during the interview, I showed Mr. Wilson a selection of branch trading statements for the Astwood Bank Post Office that Mr. Wilson confirmed were all false accounts. And then going over the page, he confirmed that all accounts produced by him over the past 5 years would also have been false accounts, as he deliberately inflated the cash on hand figure, and you produced those trading statements. So do you accept again that you don't include the mention of him of problems with Horizon?
Yes, I haven't mentioned it, no.
And you don't then go on to explain whether any further inquiries have been made in his case?
No.
And is there any reason that you haven't provided any more detail in your witness statement?
No.
And could we then move to Paul 00119090 on screen, please? So I think this is you forwarding on the committal bundle to the casework manager, Croydon. So you say that you provided a list of documents, and then under that list you say, please note I have not forwarded a GS 006D or 6E, as there's no sensitive material and nothing to undermine the case or assist the defence. So are we referring there to the schedule of sensitive material and the disclosure officer's report?
Yes.
Did you appreciate that these documents needed to be completed in any event, even if there's nothing to disclose?
I didn't know.
You subsequently went on to then complete a disclosure officer's report in which you stated there was nothing to disclose. Do you remember that?
No.
So I'll take you to
So
that.
sorry.
Sorry.
So I was saying I didn't forward those two, and subsequently
You did.
John L. Singh, I must have asked. Okay. All right.
So could we then please have Paul 00051720 on the screen, please? So we can see this is dated the 28th of May 2009, and again you're CC'd in. And Jarnell Singh says, I now enclose a copy of Council's advice and would be grateful if you could make further inquiries and deal with the matters set out in Council's advice. Did you understand that to be your responsibility?
I'm not sure, because obviously this would have gone into the casework team, I believe. But if there was any further inquiries to be dealt with, then I'm sure they would have advised what they were, or it would have been within council's advice within the case papers for me to do that.
Do you remember seeing a copy of Council's advice in this case?
Not specifically, but if it was in the case papers, then yes, because I would have obviously had to have looked at doing that.
And could we bring that up, please? It's Paul 00044751. So this advice is written by Anthony Vines, and it's dated the 22nd of May 2009. And on paragraph 4 of page 1, just further down the page, he lists a number of items that should be obtained and served. And over the page then, at paragraph C, Roman numeral 4, he says that a further statement from Mr. Patrick, who's the auditor, should state that all material times the computer was working appropriately and that there's no reason to doubt the accuracy of the information received. Did you consider that at the time?
I can't recall, but it seems a bit... I don't know how Mr. Patrick would be able to do that, really.
Is that because of his role as an auditor?
Yeah, but he wouldn't know that the computer was working appropriately at all times.
Going further down that page then, at paragraph 5A, he states that dependent upon what occurs at the PCMH, which is short for the plea and case management hearing, it may be necessary to obtain statements from Paul Van Toozy and Keith Bridges, and then going over onto the next page, and Donna Evans. So those would be the three people that would be able to speak to what Mr. Wilson was raising in his interview. Do you accept that?
Yes.
So do you accept that if council's asking for it, it's because council hasn't seen any evidence that that has been done to date?
I agree, yes.
And then at paragraph 7 of his advice, just further down the page, he makes reference to a letter dated the 14th of May 2009, and the defendant's solicitors apparently seeks information as to the number and location of other Royal Mail prosecutions. Were you aware of that letter?
Not that I can recall, no.
And halfway down that paragraph, he says, I personally am not aware that Horizon has been found to be faulty in any respects, but I would be grateful to have this point clarified. Do you remember speaking to counsel or post office lawyers about that point?
I don't know.
Do you remember considering this advice at all?
I don't. No, I'm sorry, I don't.
So if we could turn then to an email, and the reference is Paul 000051803, please. So this is an email from you to Jarnell Singh, dated the 11th of June 2009, and you say, the third paragraph down, I've noted the further evidence, I've noted the further advice requested from counsel and will await the outcome on the 15th of June 2009 as to the necessity of this further evidence. Why did you think that the hearing on the 15th of June would affect whether it was necessary to obtain this further evidence?
I don't know what kind of... I don't know whether it was a plea and case management hearing on the 15th of June and whether I was waiting... What day was it? Oh, it was 4 days before the hearing. I can only assume that I was waiting to see from the plea and case management as to whether... Well, necessity for getting the further evidence, I guess. If it had been a longer period of time, then I'm probably was thinking, well, I would needed to have got that. But I'm not saying that it wasn't probably the only case I was dealing with. And I'm not saying rightly or wrongly here, but I've probably several other cases being chased in different manners, and wrongly I've probably said I'll wait for the outcome on the 15th of June. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
Do you mean by that you were waiting to see if Mr. Wilson would plead guilty?
I guess so, yes.
And do you think that looking back that's an appropriate way to conduct?
No, it's not. Not at all.
So Mr. Wilson did plead guilty on that hearing on the 15th of June 2009. Were you present at court during that hearing?
No, I wasn't.
So do you have any involvement in agreeing his basis of plea?
No.
Do you remember being made aware of his basis of plea later?
Later, yes, after I think it was agreed with probably Jarnell Singh, Mr. Anthony Vines, and obviously between the defence as well. So I was made aware, obviously, later because I was the officer in the case. But again, it was unusual for me to be that far away from Bournemouth, and I didn't attend. There was, I think, a local guy, Mr. Dove, who was attending. And I was at the end of a telephone, basically.
In his basis, he stated that the losses occurred as a result of staff or systemic errors. So what was your view of that basis when you were made aware of it?
Either of those two, I guess. It had to be one of those. He felt it was one of those two, but...
Were you concerned that he'd said that the losses might have been due to systemic errors?
Yes, but then that wasn't anything that he hadn't said before, I think, possibly.
So looking back now, do you have any reflections in respect of how this investigation was conducted?
Yes, it was poor.
So I want to move on then to discuss the case of Mrs. Lynette Hutchings, and she was the sub-postmaster at Roylands Castle sub-post office branch. And is it correct that your role was as second officer at the interview during this case?
From the papers I've received, yes.
And can we please bring up the transcript from that interview? It's Paul 000056417. So we can see there that you were the interviewing officer with Mr. Brander, and if we just go down a little bit, that Izzy Hogg was the solicitor representing Mrs. Hutchings.
Yes.
Were you familiar with Izzy Hogg before this interview?
I believe I'd met her once before at another interview.
Were you aware that Miss Hogg had represented other sub-postmasters who'd raised problems with Horizon?
I wasn't at that time, but I am now.
So over the page, at page 2, at the start of the interview, Mrs. Hutchings read a prepared statement, and she blamed the losses at her branch on Horizon. She says at the second line, we migrated to Horizon Online in approximately May, June 2010. At the time of migration, all accounts balanced. Ever since we have been with HOL, Horizon Online, the balances have been wrong. And if we could then go to page 8, please. And we can see your initials on the left-hand side. And you say, okay, in respect of, obviously we have Izzy today, and you have prepared statement, etc. Is there any reason I could ask you why you have actually got Izzy Hogg as your solicitor and not somebody from, it's indistinct, do you not have any solicitors locally? Why did you ask that question?
I think it was because we'd had a prepared statement, and recalling back to the occasion I had met Izzy Hogg, I can't be 100%, but I had a feeling we had a prepared statement, and the prepared statement read out that the person, Lynette, somebody, that she...
Hutchings.
Lynette Hutchins had struggled to get hold of people to raise the issues, etc., etc. And as an investigating officer, I was feeling that this was her opportunity to, if you like, tell us exactly what was going wrong or what was. And I think I said that, you know, it's her obligation to do a prepared statement. But I was trying to, if you like, say, look, have you got Izzy Hogg today? Because, you know, she's told you to give a prepared statement, which, as a solicitor, that's what her role is to do. But there was no other specific reason than that, really.
Why were you asking if she didn't have any solicitors locally? Why would that have been relevant?
I guess that because I'd come across Izzy before, that I was just thinking, well, it seemed a bit, how can I say, unusual to be in another interview. I think I was the first officer with the previous case with Izzy Hogg, and on this occasion I was the second officer, and it was Izzy Hogg. And I think possibly that, as I say, there have been 2 instances of a prepared statement and no comment. And from the first interview, I think Izzy Hogg, off memory, lived around the Guildford area or somewhere like that, but I might be mistaken.
Do you think it's an appropriate question to ask an interview?
No.
And is it right that, with the exception of the interview, you didn't have any other involvement in this case?
No.
And then moving on very briefly to the case of Mrs. Susan Rudkin, who was the sub-postmaster at Ibstock Post Office. Is it correct that you were also the second investigating officer in this case?
I was, yes.
And you were assisting Mike Wilcox?
Correct, yeah.
And did you have any further involvement in this case other than the interview?
No, probably other than maybe producing a second officer statement if it was required. I can't remember, but yeah.
So the final topic then I want to just turn to is about your knowledge of errors in Horizon. And throughout your statement, and again today, you've emphasised that you're not aware of any bugs, errors or defects in Horizon while you were an investigator. But do you accept that during your time as an investigator, you'd been told by multiple sub-postmasters that they were having problems with Horizon?
I wouldn't say multiple, but yeah.
More than one? More
than one, yes. And now a greater awareness that there's more.
Can I take you then to Paul 00107562, please? This is a suspect offender report in the case of Tracy Merritt. And we can see that it's sent by you on the 10th of November 2011. And then if we look at page 3 of that report, please. And you give a brief summary of admissions or denials made at the interview. You say, on commencement of the interview, PM produced documentation from Computer Weekly with regards to the inquiry, justice for sub-postmasters being undertaken by shoesmiths, stating that 11,500 postmasters were saying the system was at fault. So do you accept that by this time you were aware that a significant number of sub-postmasters were raising errors with Horizon?
I'm not sure 11,500, it'll probably be everybody, but
That's your summary.
yeah. She's obviously produced a document by the look of it, yes.
And I just want to take you now to an email chain dated April 2015, and the reference is Paul 00176521, please. If we start at the middle of page 2. So it starts with an email from Dave Posnett, April 2015, and he's asking for files in cases where you and others were a criminal investigator or a financial investigator, because they're being subject to the review by the Criminal Case Review Commission. If we go up the page then, please. And up a bit more, thank you. We see that you reply saying, I'm pleased to advise you that I still have the electronic documents relating to 2 cases, including Mr. Wilson's. If we go up the page again, please. And we then see an email from Graham Ward asking, why are you pleased? If we go up to the top of the page, please. So this is an email sent by you to Mr. Ward on the 21st of April 2015. You say, because I want to prove that there is no no case for the justice of thieving sub-postmasters, and that we were the best investigators they ever had, and they were all crooks. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Absolutely disgraceful. It's the thing that I received last night at about 6 o'clock, and I'm appalled. I have no explanation other than you'll see the time of the email being sent.
4:10.
I think it. Oh, I thought it was 11:40 p.m.
I think it's 11 minutes past 4 in the afternoon.
Okay, then I have no.
Was that your view at the time, that these people were guilty?
The only thing I can say about this email, and the two things I can say about this email, other than say it's an absolute disgrace, and it's something that I wouldn't have wanted to be in part of the inquiry, and I can only apologise to absolutely everybody, because I've labelled absolutely everybody, so I can't defend it. Is that on the 21st of April 2015, I still, replying to no one else other than a colleague, a friend within the post office security team, that I still believed that Horizon was still nothing wrong with it, and I wasn't aware of any bugs, errors or defects. So my inference here that everybody was guilty is wrong, and I'm embarrassed, is all I can say.
Can we move on then to an email that you sent in 2021 addressed to Nick Reed, please? The reference is Paul 00113304, and it's on page 5. This is your email addressed to Nick Reed. And why did you decide to write to Nick Reed in 2021?
I think this was a couple of weeks after Mr. Wilson was acquitted, and for the first time, I now knew that there was some kind of knowledge possibly within the post office at board level, senior team of investigations or whatever, and it was a email of anger. I'm angry with myself for the one we looked at before this, I hasten to add, and this is my frustration that the business, in my opinion, for all the justices of postmasters, given what I said previously, should have been listened to. I was angry that after 32 years of being pleased for working for the post office and actually felt proud to work for them, I was no longer proud to work for them. That if anybody knew something, they certainly didn't tell me. If they didn't tell all my colleagues or people made out they didn't, I don't know. The level of my email before this one and this one, hopefully, will reiterate that that was exactly my feelings, is that I had no knowledge, which I do now have.
So your paragraph 3 of that email, you say, we were informed by Post Office Limited that the Horizon computer system was 100% correct. Who were you told that by in the post office?
Again, it was in my opinion, and again, and the wrong opinion was the message. And I don't know where this message comes from or whatever this belief is that, as far as I was aware, all my colleagues and myself, yes, we'd had challenges. Yes, we'd had people saying that we've got this document or that document. But as I say, I'd been through, I don't know how many ARQ data things, and nothing had come to light to me to say, that's a bit suspicious. And I'm not saying I was an expert, because I'd already said I was self-taught. I didn't accept the training. But what I will say is that I couldn't myself corroborate it. He's been used as, in previous evidence that I've watched, as an expert. Whether he was an expert or a lay witness, as far as I was concerned, Mr. Jenkins was given a statement to say that everything was okay. The more I've listened is now maybe that wasn't the case, because he wasn't being asked the correct questions to put in his statement. And likewise, I've now learnt that ARQ data, there was more than one option to request. So all of these things are now bringing to a head to me in this email my anger and frustration. And I'd like to, and it's not a question, but what I'd like Sir Wynne to be able to do is to find all the evidence and all the solution, everything here. And this isn't painting a picture wrongly, Sir Wynne. In what I don't know about these bugs, errors and defects is the sub-postmasters that have been brought before here and have been found innocent, is they're all referenced to losses. Now, under the terms of the contract...
So that is something that the inquiry will be investigating
as well. Okay.
So if I could just take you back then to your email, and 2 paragraphs below that, so the 5th paragraph down, in the middle of that paragraph, you say, in fact, my yearly objectives that were bonus worthy at the time were based on numbers of successful prosecutions and recovery amounts of money to the business. So is it the case then that your personal objectives and for which you received bonuses depended on those 2 things?
I can't be 100% sure, if I'm honest. There was bonus objectives. I don't know if they were individual, team-based, but there was some kind of bonus-worthy, dependent, as far as I can recall, on percentage amounts recovered for the business, something along those lines. So
if we could...
please accept this as an anger statement to the chairman of the post office. And I'm not saying that I spent a lot of time researching what I put in there. Maybe I should have not known.
So I'm actually going to take you just to another, back to that document we looked at earlier, which was your 2009 to 10 full year review, and the reference is Paul 0016 6128, please. And at just the bottom of that first page, where we see Objective 1, Information, the title of that is 40% loss recovery. Is that what you're referring to in terms of the loss recovery objective?
Yes, and reading it here now, I think the last word on there is team. So recovery of 40% of monies from investigations conducted to have a positive return rate against investigation element of team. So I'm guessing that wasn't specifically towards me.
It was a team
It
objective
was
rather
team
than
objective,
a personal objective.
But I knew there was some kind of, if you like, in that email chain, some kind of link, because I've been in the investigation team for a number of years, and I remember that there was some kind of percentage against recovery that the business was looking for.
Were you aware of any benefit that you personally received if you achieved that benefit?
Only if there was a team-based element to it, I guess.
Did that objective influence the way in which you acted as an investigator?
I'd probably be lying if I said no, because I probably, it was part of the business, the culture of the business of recoveries, or even under the terms of a postmaster's contract with a contracts manager. It was rightly or wrongly within the contract that they were responsible of making good losses. So, yeah.
So just finally then, if we could go back to your email address to Nick Reid, the reference is Paul00113304, on page 5 at the bottom of that page. So then the penultimate paragraph of your letter, you say, whilst compensation is being correctly awarded now to these sub-postmasters, I feel the employees instructed to conduct these prosecutions, arrests and searches have been completely overlooked. Can you explain what you meant by that part of your letter?
Well, I think there is part of the chain, I won't go into it too much, but I think they think I was looking for compensation when all I was really looking for was an apology, that they'd never actually brought any of this attention to myself or my colleagues. If there was any knowledge, and I say if there was any knowledge, whoever had that knowledge, that it was never, they've overlooked where we are today.
Did you think that it would be appropriate to compensate staff who are involved in these investigations and prosecutions?
No.
Thank you very much for your assistance, Mr. Thomas. I don't have any further questions for you. Sir, do you have any questions before I check whether the core participants have any questions?
No, thank you, no.
Mr. Steen, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have 5 minutes of questions. I have with me Tracy Merritt, who started her day at 4 o'clock this morning so that she could attend, so that you're aware that she is present with us in the inquiry room.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Thomas, I've got a few questions for you. As I've just indicated to the Chair, I won't be long. I appear on behalf of a very large number of sub-postmasters and mistresses who are the victims of this scandal. Can we just quickly go back, please, to the time that you've spoken about with the barrister that's just been asking you questions today, Ms. Miller. You were talking about the time in around 2008 where there was a growing awareness of sub-postmasters saying there were problems with the Horizon system, okay? And you said in your evidence that there was a message came out, were your words earlier, that was I think at about 2:20, 2:25 this afternoon. The message came out, it seems you were saying, from the post office that there wasn't a problem with the Horizon system. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yes.
Okay. So we know from other evidence that you've probably seen and heard in this inquiry that the Computer Weekly, a publication dealing with computers and their issues, had started an investigation in relation to the Horizon system. Were you aware of that around that time?
I can't be sure exactly when. I am aware now, yes.
Yes, well, considering that you and your colleagues were involved in the investigation of individuals in relation to the Horizon system,
Yes.
I'm sure that this was at least a matter of some passing interest.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the message comes out from the post office that You shouldn't be concerned about it. And yet you've also had some questions from Ms Miller this afternoon about the fact that you were aware that during your own investigation, some sub-postmasters and mistresses were saying that there were problems with the system. Is that also right?
Yes.
Right, so there's a growing body of such evidence. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you speak about that in relation to your statement, where you were involved in Mr. Wilson's case, and it's one of those cases that, again, was around 2008. Mr. Wilson's was one where Mr. Wilson was highlighting the fact of his concerns with Horizon System, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you mention in your statement, and Frankie, if you can go up on screen, please, with Mr. Thomas's statement, paragraph 45. Witness statement is WITN 09160. Thank you. So that's paragraph 45, please. So it's not the copy I have, I'm afraid, isn't a paginated statement.
No, that's okay. I've got paragraph 45 there.
I'm very grateful. Frankie, it's going to be the previous page to that, it looks like. Very grateful. Thank you, Frankie. Could you highlight, please, paragraph 45? Just make it slightly larger on the screen. Thank you. So here you're talking about you having held relevant roles within the security team. You had no specific examples of analysis being done by security team investigators of Horizon data. When an SPN's manager or assistants, Crown Office employees, attributed a shortfall to a problem with Horizon. You go on to say this, but if there were any employees that suggested this was the case, I would have asked them initially what steps they had taken to report this fact, what examples they had actually discovered on Horizon to claim this, and had they reported this at their earliest opportunity to, say, the Post Office help desk, their contracts manager, or the possibility of requesting some further training assistance, or even an audit, for example. So there you're saying in your statement that if in a matter that you were looking at, someone were to say, Mr. Thomas, there seems to be a problem with your system, those are the sorts of steps that you say that you would have taken. Is that correct?
Yes.
And to be fair, looking back in time to what we're thinking about, you had had by, 2008, as we mentioned earlier, you were on notice that there was a growing body of claims by sub-postmasters that there were problems in the Horizon system, yes?
Yes.
And presumably what you're saying here at paragraph 45 was that, well, with the knowledge that there is this growing body of problems that are being made public about the Horizon system, you'd want to operate with care. You'd want to make sure that someone has had the opportunity to raise this within the system. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you go on to say that, same paragraph, if I had any ARQ Horizon data available to me either before any interview or requested this subsequently after, I would have spent time viewing and assessing any such claim they made by looking for any potential issue. So again, what you seem to be saying there is if a sub-postmaster or sub-postmistress had made such a claim, what you would want to do is speak to them about what they had tried to do, how they'd raised it, how it come about. Is that right?
Yes.
And also you'd want to then do the other side of it, from an investigator's point of view, which is to try and find within the system ARQ data, yes?
Yes.
And to be trying to analyse what you were doing, therefore, rather than just ignoring a sub-postmaster or mistress, you'd want to actually, look at this thing properly as an investigator. Is that
yes.
right?
Okay. Obviously now, at the time, I wasn't aware that Horizon data, our ARQ data, wouldn't have shown me anything. But in writing the statement, exactly was what I would want to do.
These are the steps you're saying.
Yes.
It seems to.
Yes.
It seems to reading your statement. These are the steps you'd want to take. Okay. All right. Now, if we can then go, please, to Mrs. Tracy Merritt's interview. It's got a slightly odd citation for it. So on the system, it's HOCO and then 602. And Frankie, I think, has it available for us onto the screen. I'm very grateful. Now, so the pagination of this isn't very good. It's at top right-hand corner in hand, and so I'm going to be referring to the top right-hand corner pagination as we have it there. And Frankie, if you could just show the first page further down so that we can see what's going on. The date of interview is 9th of 11th, 2011. So we can see there that you're one of the interviewing officers of Tracy Merritt, and another person present is Mike Robinson, a solicitor. You're with also Lisa Allen, a colleague of yours. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Now, Tracy Merritt, her background was that she was someone that used to work for the she used to work for social services before becoming a sub-postmaster or mistress. She was a childcare officer. She had, with her family, gone into the post office business, if you like, in order to find a stable income and also to support her family. And she had two post office branches in Dorset, the one at Yetminster and the one at Chetnote. I'm probably saying both those names very badly, but that's where she operated from and had her businesses. And so she'd put a lot of effort and a lot of time into these businesses. And her background in childcare, working for social services, might be said to be something to her credit. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yes. Now, what she then says when she's being asked questions by you, Mr. Thomas, we see at the bottom of the page that's on the screen, next to 303 and then GT, your initials. Can I ask you to explain to me why there was that shortage at the branch? Well, Tracy Merritt says because your computers are naff, basically, because the computers do their own thing. You go off at night and they're balanced, and you come in the morning and you've got a deficit. Now, can we go, please, Frankie, to page 15, again using the handwritten pagination, top right-hand corner. Very grateful. Now, here we've got a continuation of this interview. You're saying this on the night of the balance of the 28th, but this cheque hadn't been entered on the Horizon system, had it? No. Why did you not enter it onto the Horizon system then? Because I just told you I'd already done all my work done my end of week, realised that the office was throwing up losses again, which were, it seems to do because your computer system does its own thing. So I wrote out the cheque. Once I've really done the end of week, you can't go back in and do it because that looks stupid. So first thing in the morning, that is the first thing to do. But obviously I never got to that stage because your auditors were there. So you can see that Tracy Merritt in the interview has said it, with pinpoint clarity, that basically the computer system doesn't work properly. It's naff. It is throwing up the wrong numbers. It's fairly clear, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, well, let's then consider then how you dealt with that at this stage. And can we go, please, to page 24 of the interview, again using the same handwritten pagination, top right-hand corner. Thank you, Frankie. So here we have, against the time, tape counter times, 29, person speaking, this is GT, this is you. Do you think that it is only your two computers at Chetnote and Yetminster that there is a problem with the post office? Then given that we have, I don't know, 17,000 post offices operating on the same computer system? And Tracy Merritt says, no, I don't. I'm sorry, no, I don't. There's 11,500 of us that are all having problems. Now, let's work backwards. So the 11,500 mention seems to be, if this transcript in this note of what she said is correct, is what she's saying. She's also shown you from the other evidence that the inquiry has seen, she's shown you some information that's come from the campaign group in relation to justice for sub-postmasters. You're aware of the background in relation to Computer Weekly, all of these things, yes?
I'm not sure about Computer Weekly, but yes, the one that she showed me.
Yes, and you're aware of the background in relation to the issues that have been coming to your attention since 2008, yes?
A couple, a handful, yes.
And you dismiss her. You dismiss her complaint by saying this, that do you think it's only your two computers at Chetno and Yetminster that there is a problem with the post office? So given we have, I don't know, 17,000 post offices operating on the same system. Basically, you're saying to Tracy Merritt that what's your problem? Nobody else has got it. You're saying to her that she's an isolated case of a difficulty with two computers that she happens to be running at two branches. That's what you're saying, aren't you, Mr. Thomas?
I think we've not gone through the whole transcript, sir.
Well,
I think when you look at the whole transcript, you may get a better picture of it, possibly, rather than the highlighted bits you've just brought out.
well, let's just stay with what we've got here for the moment, Mr. Thomas. I went through what you said in your statement about the way that you would like to deal with these issues when they're raised. You would inquire as to, well, what's the problem, and have you raised this as anybody? You would want to make sure that you've got the data from the computer system, the ARC data and the like. It's hardly the attitude you're displaying here. This is just you saying, this is rubbish. You're making it up. Why is it only you that's making this complaint? You knew it was different to that, didn't you, Mr. Thomas?
No. I don't know if it's possible to look at, but I only received this information yesterday. But I did notice, because a bit like Miss Merritt, I was up very early this morning, but the evidence that I looked at earlier on, I think there's a tab in there, number 30, and it talks about a second interview tape, which I don't think we've got there. I don't know if it's possible to refer to it at all.
Tell us what you want to say about it,
Okay.
Mr. Thomas.
I think it was to do with, I don't know if it was known as a Helen Rose inquiry or whatever, but it's the first one on the actual document that came in as well at the same time, saying about the brief summaries of recent challenges, Yetminster being one. And on the summary it says, and obviously I haven't got the second tape, 6 minutes into the second tape, Miss Merritt states, I'm not trying to blame the Horizon system, I'm saying that my office kept coming up with losses. Towards the end of the second tape transcript, Miss Merritt admitted that the losses had been accumulating since the end of July 2011 and that she had not been putting the money in for these losses, simply rolling the losses and inflating the cash. Gary Thomas, the lead officer in this case, commented at the end of the report, it should be noted that this is likely to be further challenged towards the integrity of the Horizon system. So I hadn't seen the second tape, I haven't seen the second tape. I can only go on what's been written in this Horizon Integrity report that I saw this morning at the same time I saw this. So I'm not defending any of my actions because, as I've said all along, I'm not saying that I shouldn't have raised it, and I did raise it by the look of it that there was a Horizon Integrity issue. But it does say in tape 2, which I have no action to, within there. So that's the only reasonable offer of an answer I can give you.
It's not what we're asking about, Mr. Thomas, is it? We're asking about your reaction to what is said by Tracy Merritt. She's saying, I've got these problems with these two computers, the two branches I operate, and your response is, you're the only one, Tracy Merritt. You're the only one that's complaining about this. Yet you knew, Mr. Thomas, you knew that there had been a rise in these issues that had been coming forward. So when you said that you looked at these things with care, or would do, if they ever brought to your attention in your statement, it wasn't true, was it, Mr. Thomas?
I'll agree with you, but as I say, there was other things within the tapes, including a cheque that was written out and there wasn't funds in the account.
Well, why didn't you, Mr. Thomas, operate with a bit more care, with a bit more respect to the sub-postmaster, or sub-postmaster, sub-postmistress, I should say, in this case? Why didn't you operate with a little bit more circumspection to say, look, there have been these problems raised. I appreciate where you're coming from. I'll check into that. Why don't you do that, Mr. Thomas?
I don't know, and I apologise.
Now, Mr. Thomas, you've said in your statement that you're livid about the fact that these issues with the Horizon system were kept from you.
Yes.
You say you're very angry. You say that at two different sections of your statement. And you've obviously been referred by Ms. Miller to the note that you wrote to Mr. Reid. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Have you any idea how Tracy Merritt feels about your operation, your part in what happened to her, about the loss of her business, the damage to her life, the shock to her system, the health deficits that she has felt over the years? Have you the slightest idea how she feels?
I can imagine as a bit like Mrs. Wilson as well, and my apologies go to Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Merritt, and everybody.
So,
That
thank
it,
you.
Mr. Steen?
Yes, sir.
Anybody else?
Sir, Ms Patrick here. We would like to ask one question. Sorry, I apologise.
Miss Patrick here, sir. We'd like to ask one question about one document, if there is time.
Well, as long as your one question is one question, unlike Mr. Steen's 5 minutes.
Sir, I will do my best.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, my name's Miss Patrick. I, like Mr. Stain, represent a number of sub-postmasters. The majority of our clients were convicted and have now had their convictions overturned. And I know that you've talked about your feelings about the email in 2015. I'd like to go back to that document just very briefly. It's Paul 20176 521. Sorry, 521. And if we can just look at the first paragraph, please. Before we look at what that says, Miss Miller took you, I just remind you, to the internal document looking at targets. And I think that you agreed the target that was set there on 40% losses. I think that was about recovery of losses up to 40% across the team. Is that fair?
I think that's right, yes.
And I just want to put these two together. The second part of this email, the first paragraph, we haven't looked at yet. I just want to read it. After saying, and they were all crooks. Oh, and we never hit our post office profit targets anymore, as we stopped getting XXX million in recoveries from bloody good financial recoveries through my good friends Ward, Harbison, Posnett and the like. To be fair, I just want to check, the 40% target on recoveries, are those the recoveries that you're referencing here in that email?
They would be part of it, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for coming to give evidence and for answering the questions that you have this afternoon. Mrs. Merritt, I'm pleased to see you in attendance at the inquiry, and I hope that you have found the session which you've attended informative. And I wish you a good journey home if you're going home, if that's going to take another long time. So thank you all very much. We're not going to sit tomorrow, as I indicated at the beginning of this session, and I'll see everyone on Tuesday morning.
Thank you, sir.